The stone won't fall until the podcast of the dragon comes to your device. Hey everybody, my name is Morgan. You might know me as the Grey Warder on Twitter and Discord. Welcome to episode 9 of Podcast of the Dragon. How brilliant is the beginning of the Great Hunt? Let me count the ways. Rand is sad and stressed, and since we can't laugh with him, Robert Jordan lets us laugh at him by showing us the land of Shinar and making it seem even nobler in comparison with our sheepherders' bumbling cluelessness. Seriously, how did they mistake him for a lord? For all that they're a bit formulaic, the first 3 books of The Wheel of Time are absolutely terrific. I don't have a favorite Wheel of Time book, but I always find myself loving the beginning trilogy. The freshness and the novelty of the world building make up for whatever it lacks in plot strength. Everything is too new and exciting for me to concern myself with what it might be missing, and that's true no matter how often I've reread them. Robert Jordan settles into the story that is his saga by book 4. In The Shadow Rising, you really dig into what it means to be the dragon, and politics starts playing a much bigger role. Characters spread their wings, you start getting point of views from important characters that you've only up until that point been seeing through others' eyes, characters like Elaine. There's a reason The Shadow Rising is many people's favorite book. There's a real depth there. It's like the story just opens up. There's world building on a much grander scale. But what the first 3 books do is use small pictures to create larger pictures, like starting an incredibly detailed puzzle in the center, at a spot where the individual pieces have recognizable images. The world building in The Eye of the World was thrilling partly just because it was new. And there was so much to learn, so RJ gives you all of these little hints. He's dropping bits of history and information. You're hearing about the Prologue Wars and the War of the 100 Years, and you're learning that there are statues and ancient artifacts like Whitebridge and towers, and Baal Domin is telling the boys about these things like razor lace and things that hum when the moon goes down, and you're seeing the characters learn more and more as they get out into the world. Rand sees his first city, and then as he moves on from Barlon and gets to Camelin, and he realizes, oh no, Barlon was actually a really small town, and their horizons just broaden and broaden. There's this kind of snowballing growth of awareness of the world that is theirs. And through most of the first book, that world consists of Andor. Rather than continuing to build on that world with a measured, gradual growth of their knowledge, like a subtle shifting that happens as culture changes over time and space, RJ, at the end of the first book, just moves you to a completely different part of Randland. He doesn't give the story a chance to become familiar or the characters a chance to grow comfortable. Instead, he just has the party take the ways and go to Shinar, basically drop their bags off, and then go to the Eye of the World for the climactic finish. RJ had this gigantic world, and there's so much that he needed to show people, so he made use of the flexibility allowed by the fantasy genre to move the heroes somewhere new, so they could just start the second book once again totally ignorant about the world, or nearly, having us learn as they do. And then in the first 9 chapters of The Great Hunt, Robert Jordan capitalizes on that to do some marvelous world building within a mostly limited environment. Most of it he does just within the walls of Faldara Keep. So I operate with this podcast like everyone is very familiar with the books. But I'll do a quick synopsis of the prologue through the first 9 chapters, just so that everything that I reference is fresh. Jacob Carradine, the man who calls himself Bors, is at the Dark Friends Social, where everybody is getting orders from Baalzamon, both group orders to be on the lookout for Rand, Mat, and Perrin, and individual orders to individually go out and fuck shit up. Next, we see Rand and Lon sparring on the tower top in Faldara Keep when they are rudely interrupted by the arrival of the Amyrlin Seat. Rand freaks out, figuring that she's come to gentle him. He's been dicking around the past 4 weeks, meaning to leave, but he keeps putting it off because he's going to miss his besties, and also the thought of going off into isolation to go insane and die alone isn't super appealing, and so he's been dragging his feet, and lo and behold, all of these Aes Sedai show up, and he freaks out. So he makes a mad dash for his room to pack his shit, and he barely escapes having to do a striptease for some nosy serving women who insist on every last article of his clothing. But he's getting a dozen new coats and new boots, so it's kind of hard to feel sorry for him. He squeezes into his tight new pants, grabs the rest of his shit, and decides to walk across the courtyard because it's A, the fastest way to get to his horse, and B, full of Aes Sedai, and he just has to have a look at the Amyrlin, which is a look he soon regrets because it turns out she's scary. He gets to the stable and learns that all of the horses are on lockdown, and it turns out he can't leave on foot either. So he looks to hide instead, and in the process he runs into Mat, Perrin, and Loial and tells them to fuck off out of his life, because he has to get rid of them sooner or later, so he might as well capitalize on an opportunity when he's feeling miserable and angsty. He runs into Egwene as he's looking for somewhere to hide, and she suggests the dungeons, but takes the suggestion back after they've been there a minute or two, and it's not even the super creepy guards Changu and Nadao that make her change her mind, but the fact that Padan Fain, who she's been visiting all this time, is no longer cheerful and friendly and like his old self, but the kind of creep that makes Changu and Nadao look like innocent grandmas. Egwene smuggles Rand into the women's apartments instead, and he takes a nap in her room while she goes back to visit Fain. And before you judge her too harshly, remember RJ needed a plausible reason for Mat to cross paths with Fain so Fain could steal the dagger. Having Mat accompany Egwene on her humanitarian mission was a decent way to make that happen. Rand wakes up from his nap. He has a talk with Nynaeve, and he sulkily names the Dark One over the course of their conversation. Coincidentally, at the same time, the alarm bells go off in the keep, because someone has slain the guards at the dog gate and let Trollocs into the keep. Rand freaks the fuck out again because he thinks that it's all his fault, and he runs to go to Egwene, making a huge commotion in the women's apartments as he's fleeing through them with the sword in hand. On his way to the dungeon, he comes across a Fade that has killed 7 men. Before Rand can make 8, Ingtar is there, telling him, hey, fuck off and fight a few Trollocs first, I've got this. Rand gets to the dungeon, the door is open, the guards' heads are on the table, and Fain has left him a love note on the inner door promising a future date on tome and head. RAL plus FP, it's never over, in a big bloody heart. Egwene and Mat are outside Fain's cell, both unconscious, she from a head blow, and him because losing the dagger fucked him up somehow. And the prisoners that were in there fared even worse. Lon comes for Rand and tells him Moraine has moved his shit back into his own room and he can leave whenever he wants. She had Agilmar exempt him from the order. The latest order, because no one knows what he's talking about when he mentions the order that originally kept him from leaving, the one that neither Tima the Groom nor Regan and Massima would make up. Rand can't make himself leave until he knows that his friends are going to be okay, so he waits too long, once again, and Lon shows up in his room to tell him he's been summoned. He makes Rand brush his hair and put on some nice clothes and spends 10 minutes or so teaching him some elaborate manners in the hopes of keeping him from looking like an asshole in front of the Amyrlin Seat. Good luck with that, Lon. Rand has an uncomfortable meeting with the Amyrlin, Varen, and Moraine, where they say, you can ride with your friends to find the Horn of Valir. Here's all this info we have on your dad. BT Dubs, we know you can channel. Extra BT Dubs, you're the Dragon Reborn. This is the first of many meetings with dignitaries that Rand will have over the rest of the series, often nearly as uncomfortable. Then Rand says goodbye to Egwene, grabs his shit, and heads for his horse to leave to go hunt the Horn. In my younger days, which is back in the 90s, reading and rereading The Great Hunt, I always disliked the prologue with the Dark Friends Social. It's not about the main characters, and so early in the series it's hard to be interested in a point of view that doesn't belong to someone we're emotionally invested in. Jordan is in the Dark Friends Socials showing an early example of what he is so incredibly talented at, fleshing out a minor point of view and showing a real person with very little in the way of writing to develop the character. In just a handful of paragraphs, a few pages, he fleshes out Jacob Carradine very well. But in this case, as far as the tone of it, Carradine's an asshole. And so it's not like it's fun to read. You're reading from the point of view of this judgmental, slimy dickhead who's, looking down on everyone and who's a real piece of shit, and he's surrounded by other people who are real pieces of shit. But however tonally gross it feels and devoid of warm fuzzies, the prologue is interesting in what it shows you. I listen to a lot of Wheel of Time content, first-time readers particularly, and so I've heard a number of them discussing Robert Jordan's prologues, particularly as they get further into the series, because the prologues can be so very long. The Shadow Rising is the dividing line for Wheel of Time books when it comes to the prologues, because it doesn't have one. Maybe chapter 1 in that book should have been one, since it does multiple point of views, but it's mostly Min's White Tower arc, so I can see why he chose to make it a chapter instead. I probably would have chosen to make it a prologue, but the logic of making it a chapter is there, and I get it. Pre-Shadow Rising, the prologues are fairly short and only for one or two point of views, and I've realized that they do a couple of things. They paint a scene that occurs out of the main character's eyes, where events have relevance in the story and will be important later on, and they show foreshadowing, or they hint at some future headache that awakes. And in the later, longer prologues, the ones that come after book 4, they lay out the board. It's like he's setting out all of the characters and all of the plot points and putting them all into position. Characters and plot points that are going to be played out in the current book, and sometimes characters or plot points that won't even come into play until the next book. And he'll put them out, or at least show you in the prologue what's happening with them. And then sometimes you won't even see them again until the next book. He does that with Rhodolite Errata in Crossroads of Twilight, and he lays all of that stuff out there, and then come chapter 1, he starts the game. With the Dark Friends Social, it does some minor world building regarding things like Dark Friend psychology, and for a first-time reader who's reading it, they'll get their first descriptions of the fashions and physical characteristics of a number of different countries. So they're getting views of the way people dress in Ilion or in Eridomen, and they're learning the names of other countries that before they would have only heard or known from looking on a map. You also see that, contrary to what Rand thought, Baalzamon is not dead. In fact, he's even stronger than he was, because rather than just talking to the boys in horrible dreams, he's brought 100 dark friends to this weird place that is not quite right. A place that he has populated with creepy blonde mind-reading waiters. And if a first-time reader is reading it way more critically than I ever did, they pick up that one of the Terran High Lords is there. But all of that is extra detail. The real purpose of the Dark Friends Social is to set up Jacob Carradine's campaign of fuckery on Almouth Plain and to show Ingtar receiving his orders. I've heard people talk about the Dark Friends Social and say that the time that it takes place is ambiguous, that it could be taking place before the heroes go to the Eye of the World, or at any number of other times. But we know that it takes place just a few days before Chapter 1 begins, and we know that from Lon's remark to Rand as the Aes Sedai start heading into Valdara. The wind flapped the banner, taller than a man, straight out to one side. As big as it was close enough now for Rand to see clearly, a swirl of colors that meant nothing to him, but at the heart of it a shape like a pure white teardrop. His breath froze in his throat. The flame of Tar Valon. Ingtar's with them. Lon sounded as if his thoughts were elsewhere. Back from his hunting at last. Been gone long enough. I wonder if he had any luck. So Ingtar's coming back from the Dark Front social and happens to beat up with the Aes Sedai along the way. And while it's never specifically stated that it's Ingtar, Bors's description says, a man in a high-collared sky-blue shiner and coat passed him with a wary head-to-toe glance through the eye-holes of his mask. The man's carriage named him Soldier. The set of his shoulders, the way his gaze never rested in one place for long, and the way his hand seemed ready to dart for a sword that was not there, all proclaimed it. So, considering everything that goes on to happen in this book, it makes no sense for this not to be Ingtar, especially because the Wheel of Time companion states that he was at the Dark Friends social. It says, at a meeting of Dark Friends, Ingtar received orders, and when he encountered Rand and Emerdril, he sent Rand away and went with the Fade to free Fain. So, if you were ever wondering who freed Padan Fain, it was Ingtar. I think that it's great that Robert Jordan had the party fast travel from Camelin to Shinar. Shinaran culture is so different from Andor, and while the Two Rivers is considered very separate from the rest of Andor, or at least they consider themselves quite separate, it has fundamentally similar characteristics. Both the Two Rivers and the rest of Andor tend to be blunt, no-nonsense people. They're very individualistic, they don't give any fucks. I feel like Robert Jordan designed the Two Rivers specifically, but Andor as well, to be very much American. And I mean the best and finest things about what it is to be U.S. American, not everything that makes it the giant trash fire that I'm living in right now. A lot of people say, oh, Andor is modeled after England, but I don't agree with that at all. I know that he modeled a lot of the Two Rivers on an idea of the South, and their conservatism is definitely more Southern culture, though a lot of their independence reminds me of the West as well. I live on the west coast of the United States, specifically in the western part of the state of Oregon, and I don't think of Camelin as being like British culture. I think of Camelin as being New England, the northeastern part of the United States. It has a more formal culture. I think less so now in the internet age than back in the 90s when I was going to college on the East Coast, or when my mom was growing up back in Massachusetts in the 50s and 60s. But I really do think of the culture of Eastern Andor being kind of like the Eastern United States, and the culture of Western Andor being kind of like the West mixed with the South, which is not the same as the Southwest. Southwestern United States has another culture entirely. And Matt is the one Two Rivers character that I truly think of as having a West Coast temperament, because he just doesn't give a fuck as far as being utterly informal. Matt would definitely fit in as a Portland hipster. And to give you an idea of Portland, Oregon, there is no five-star restaurant, no fine establishment of any kind in Portland that you could go where it would not be perfectly acceptable to wear jeans and sneakers. And some people might silently judge you for it, but no one would ever say anything because they know that they would be the ones who were out of line. Telling someone their outfit is too casual for whatever event or establishment you're at is far ruder than actually showing up in shorts and a t-shirt. You get dressed up here to go and do things like go to the ballet or go out to dinner, but only if you feel like it, not because it's expected. And I go to the Nutcracker every year, and you will see people at the Nutcracker in hoodies and track pants, because it's just part of Pacific Northwest culture to dress as casually as possible. People here will come to work in pajamas, depending on the work. I mean, I work in a factory. If you work in an office, you're probably not going to come to work in pajamas, but I've known coworkers who came to work in their pajama pants because it's just, people don't care. Kids go to school in their pajamas because nobody cares, and trying to make people care, it doesn't get you anywhere because everybody just kind of looks at you like, why are you making a fuss about something that doesn't matter? And the way that Matt just laughs at people when they want to make an issue out of something, and he just thinks that's so funny because he has no intention of changing to suit them, and he enjoys watching them struggle trying to make him meet their expectations. That is very much a West Coast attitude. And I know that some people would definitely disagree that Andor and the Two Rivers is modeled on the United States. But if I had to pick something in the text in this first bit of the Great Hunt that perfectly illustrates the Americanness of the Two Rivers folks, it's the scene where the Amyrlin is charging Ingtar to find the horn. It says, Ingtar and the other men shifted in their saddles, preparing to dismount and kneel, but she motioned them to stay as they were. Lyanna stood at her shoulder and Agelmar a pace back. From his glum face he appeared to have given up trying to convince her to remain longer. The Amyrlin looked at them one by one before she spoke. Her gaze stayed on Rand no longer than on any other. Peace favor your sword, Lord Ingtar, she said finally. Glory to the builders, loyal Kisaran. You honor us, mother. May peace favor Tar Valon. Ingtar bowed in his saddle, and the other Shienarans did too. All honor to Tar Valon, Loyal said, bowing. Only Rand and his two friends on the other side of the party stayed upright. He wondered what she had said to them. Lyanna's frown took in all three of them, and Agelmar's eyes widened, but the Amyrlin took no notice. The boys not bowing wasn't rudeness or defiance or anything like it. It just literally didn't occur to them to bow. It never would have occurred to them, and that is so very American, to be utterly unaware of a social courtesy like that. So that herp derp, the boys there, that is why I see the Two Rivers and Andor as being super American. In the prologue through the first 9 chapters, Jordan manages to open the world up enormously. He switches up his world building near the end of the Eye of the World when the party leaves the Waygate and comes out into Shinar. Rather than just continuing to increase the volume of their knowledge, he uses contrast to great effect, just with descriptions of geographic features or phenomenon that are unknown to the Emmons Fielders. For instance, Rand noticed trees split open as if struck by lightning. The cold, Lon answered when he asked. Sometimes the winter is so cold here the sap freezes and trees burst. There are nights when you can hear them cracking like fireworks, and the air is so sharp you think that might shatter too. There are more than usual this winter fast. Rand shook his head. Trees bursting? And that was during an ordinary winter. What must this winter have been like? Surely like nothing he could imagine. Who says winter's past? Matt said, his teeth chattering. Why this, a fine spring, sheepherder, Lon said. Rand also notices architecture as he's looking at farms. The tall house, odd to Rand's Two Rivers eyes, with its sharp-peaked roof of big wooden shingles running almost to the ground, was still and silent. So, like, they have A-frame houses there, which is cool. I think A-frame houses are awesome. And RJ shows us things about how shadow spawn are just a way of life and are taken for granted. The party goes into the town and they learn that no one can hide their faces there, and they see that people often seek the protection of Faldara's walls. All of the farms are abandoned, and they see that Aes Sedai and Ogier are both known and shown great respect. And then you get the descriptions of the armor and the clothing and hairstyles with the top knots and their speech patterns, the type of oaths that they use, the names. Jordan, one of the things I think he does so well is each country has very distinctive types of names, and you can usually tell where a character is from by hearing their name, because each region has very distinctive appellations. There's like a national flavor to each people's different types of names. And the Shienarans names are very different from the Emmons Fielders' names, and their names are even very different from Lon's name. And you'll notice later, meeting other Malkyri, that they have very different types of names that are quite different from other Borderlanders, but very similar to each other's. There's just this whole general grim aura. Like, the whole flavor of the story has changed. Like, they went through the ways and things got scrambled. They went through this terrible, dark nightmare trip, and they came out on the other side into an alien land. In Shinar, we experience a very formal culture that is deeply contrasted with the casual, if kind of uptight people that we know. When we first meet Ingtar, as Rand's gawking around the courtyard and kind of taking in this busy fortress for the first time, he's never seen anything like this. He fell into the palace in Camelin, but that was completely different. It was beautiful and grand and meant to be enjoyed, and this is a totally different atmosphere. It says, the first courtyard was a huge square paved with big stone blocks and surrounded by towers and battlements as fierce as those on the outside of the walls. As big as it was, the courtyard appeared just as crowded as the streets and as much in turmoil, though there was an order to the crowding here. Everywhere were armored men and armored horses. At half a dozen smithies around the court, hammers clanged, and big bellows, tugged by 2 leather-aproned men apiece, made the forge fires roar. A steady stream of boys ran with new-made horseshoes for the farriers. Fletchers sat making arrows, and every time a basket was filled, it was whisked away and replaced with an empty one. Liveried grooms appeared on the run, eager and smiling in black and gold. Rand hastily untied his belongings from behind the saddle and gave the bay up to one of the grooms as a man in plate and mail and leather bowed formally. He wore a bright yellow cloak edged in red over his armor, with a black hawk on the breast, and a yellow surcoat bearing a gray owl. He wore no helmet and was bareheaded truly, for his hair had all been shaved except for a topknot tied with a leather cord. "It has been long, Moraine Aes Sedai. It is good to see you, Daishan, very good." He bowed again to Loyal and murmured, "Glory to the builders. Ki Sarai Ti Wancho." "I am unworthy," Loyal replied formally, "and the work small. Singu Machoba." "You honor us, builder," the man said. "Ki Sarai Ti Wancho." He turned back to Lon. "Word was sent to Lord Agelmar, Daishan, as soon as you were seen coming. He is waiting for you. This way, please." This is way beyond even the reserve and refinement that we see from Elaine and Gowan and Camelin. And it's not that Ingtar is a nobleman and the Emmons Fielders are commoners. Shinar is just a totally different culture. The theme of gender is so central to Robert Jordan's story, which I think he does that partly to just show how the world is a world out of balance. When we get glimpses of the Age of Legends, there is much less gender contrast. We particularly see that when we go through Rand's eyes and the glass columns in Rhuidean. Before the Boar, there just really isn't a super distinction between the sexes. It's like the breaking paved the way for patriarchy to a certain extent, which makes sense. During incredible chaos and social upheaval, particularly the type of chaos and social upheaval that means that your infrastructure is destroyed and your very geography is destroyed, that's a level of chaos and social upheaval and destruction that frankly none of us can actually imagine, because however much destruction that war and famine and chaos has brought into our world, we still cannot imagine a world so destroyed that the land is unrecognizable. So in the aftermath of something like that, there is likely to be a certain amount of patriarchy in place just because women are likely to not have access to birth control right away. And women in fleeing groups of refugees were likely forced to carry pregnancies whether they wanted them or not, either because they had no way to safely terminate them or because the group/men wouldn't allow them to terminate them because of a reduction in population. And let me hop on my soapbox for a second and say one of the reasons why abortion must always be safe and legal for women is because women cannot be equal to men if we cannot control if and when we are pregnant. And so in a situation where women can't control if and when they are pregnant, there is inevitably going to be some manner of gendered imbalance. But in Jordan's world, because of the Aes Sedai and a suspicion of male channelers and men in general, because of the taint on saidin, it kind of makes it patriarchy light, even in the midst of all the chaos. And eventually, once everything settles down, it kind of skews things the other way in some places where women are able to dominate. And so exploring how men and women comport themselves in Shinar versus what the Emmons Fielders are used to is great. There's such a dramatic difference and in such interesting ways. The Shinaran idea that a woman would never be in danger from harm from anything but shadow spawn, it's not exactly alien to the Emmons Fielders, but the emphasis is. Violence against women is not common in the Two Rivers, and it definitely isn't approved of. When Rand and Matt are performing in Four Kings at the Dancing Cartman, Rand cannot understand why the horrible skinny innkeeper Samuel Hake, why his barmaids put up with his bullshit. He slaps the barmaids and yells at them, and Rand can't fathom why they tolerate it. And it's not even that he feels judgmental that a man would treat women so. Rand's view of women is one where he questions why they put up with it. That is what's stunning to him. Not that it happened, though that shocks him, but that there are not consequences. That Samuel Hake does not suffer consequences imparted upon him by the women for his behavior toward them. It's hinted that, though uncommon and utterly unacceptable, violence against women isn't totally unknown in the Two Rivers. It never specifically says that the women's circle judges those types of crimes or that it judges sex crimes, but it is implied because Nynaeve, when she's discussing a wisdom dispensing justice, says that certain crimes are only ever judged by the women's circle. So the rare sex crime or act of domestic violence is probably a subject of whispered gossip and intense judgment in the Two Rivers, but there are consequences for it. It's dealt with by the women's circle and by the wisdom, and it's very much frowned upon and not utterly unknown, but it is not something that you see very often. But sex crimes and domestic violence seem to be absolutely unheard of in Shinar. There, women fear nothing but the shadow. Rand's default setting is to protect women, and that it's a man's place to die so that a woman doesn't have to. That is the same in both lands. But in the Two Rivers, the default setting is not revere women and set them above you. Rand is used to strong separation of gender roles. In the Two Rivers, men and women do different types of work, they have different social structures, and there isn't really friendship across the genders, not for the most part. But while the Two Rivers has strong gender separation, there is a sense of separate but equal. They have different governing bodies. The Women's Circle and the Village Council have, they balance each other. Each is in charge of different aspects of village life. They enforce different customs and laws. And so while gender roles are strict, there is a sense of egalitarianism. Shinar also has strict separation between the genders, but it is far stricter than the Two Rivers in many ways, and women are elevated above men. It's not just that it's a man's place to die, or that women's lives are worth more. Women's desires are worth more, and their sense of privacy and agency is much more valued. Their rooms are separated. Women sleep on one side of the keep in these sacrosanct apartments that they guard, even though they know no man would ever enter without permission, and men sleep on the other side. Even married women sleep separated by gender. And so if they want to bone down with their husbands, their husbands have to get invited in and then presumably fuck off afterwards, which kind of sucks. But women can come into the men's apartments without permission. When Rand comes back to his room as he's getting ready to get dressed and flee because the Amerlin has rolled on up, and he's like, I've got to get the fuck out of here because she's come because of me, and he finds his room full of serving women going through his clothes and throwing everything away and putting up a new wardrobe. The Shadayan, the woman who is in charge of the entire keep, she can go wherever the fuck she wants, but men must always wait outside the women's apartments. They have to get invited in. And they can be forced to wait as long as the women like. In Egwene's point of view, as Rand is trying to see her before he leaves with Ingtar to go hunt the horn, you get the women gathered around the entrance to the women's apartments, both inside and out, were all watching three men in the hallway outside. Rand, with his sword buckled over his red coat, was being confronted by Agelmar and Kadjin. Neither of them wore a sword. Even after what had happened in the night, these were still the women's apartments. Egwene stopped at the back of the crowd. "You understand why you cannot go in," Agelmar was saying. "I know that things are different in Andor, but you do understand." "I didn't try to go in." Rand sounded as if he had explained all this more than once already. "I told the Lady Nisura I wanted to see Egwene, and she said Egwene was busy and I'd have to wait. All I did was shout for her from the door. I did not try to enter. You'd have thought I was naming the Dark One the way they all started in on me." "Women have their own ways," Kadjin said. He was tall for a Shineran, almost as tall as Rand, lanky and sallow. His topknot was black as pitch. "They set the rules for the women's apartments, and we abide by them even when they are foolish." A number of eyebrows were raised among the women, and he hastily cleared his throat. "You must send a message in if you wish to speak to one of the women, but it will be delivered when they choose, and until it is you must wait. That is our custom." And a little further down, "Here is your Egwene," Kadjin said, spotting her. Agelmar looked around and nodded when he saw her with Nisura. "I will leave you in her hands, Rand al'Thor. Remember, here her words are law, not yours. Lady Nisura, do not be too hard on him. He only wished to see his young woman, and he does not know our ways." Egwene followed Nisura as the Shineran woman threaded her way through the watching women. Nisura inclined her head briefly to Agelmar and Kadjin. She pointedly did not include Rand. Her voice was tight. "Lord Agelmar? Lord Kadjin? He should know this much of our ways by now, but he is too big to spank, so I will let Egwene deal with him." Agelmar gave Rand a fatherly pat on the shoulder. "You see, you will speak with her, if not exactly in the way you wished." You can tell that Rand struggles with these differences. It makes sense to him to die so a woman doesn't have to, but to be jerked around on a woman's pleasure as a matter of course, that is a lesson in patience and humility, and it's not something that he's used to. He is also unused to the disparity of comforts. As he's getting ready to flee, he's got all the serving women in his room and he forces them out. They're like, "You have to give us all your clothes and your boots too." It says, he dropped onto his bed to tug off his boots. They were still good, a little worn, the leather cracked here and there, but still wearable and well broken in to fit his feet. Then hastily stripped off, piling everything atop the boots, and washed at the basin just as quickly. The water was cold. The water was always cold in the men's apartments. So he hates washing in cold water. When he's hiding from the Aes Sedai in Egwene's room, he takes special notice of how much better her accommodations are than his. His room is described, it has 3 beds, 3 chairs, 3 chests, and a wardrobe with 3 doors and a washstand. And it probably has a chamber pot that's in the corner. I'm guessing they can't fit it under the beds because the beds sit on tiled stoves, but it has nothing else. It has no luxuries. But it says as he's in Egwene's room and he notices that the rocking chair that Nynaeve is using is silenced by the rug. There had been nights of late when he had wished for a carpet on the cold stone floor of his room, but in Shinar men's rooms were always bare and stark. The walls here had 2 tapestries, mountain scenes with waterfalls, and flower-embroidered curtains alongside the arrow slits. Cut flowers, white morning stars, stood in a flat round vase on the table by the bed, and more nodded in glazed white sconces on the walls. A tall mirror stood in a corner, and another hung over the washstand with its blue-striped pitcher and bowl. He wondered why Egwene needed 2 mirrors. There was none in his room, and he did not miss it. There was only 1 lamp lit, but 4 more stood around the room, which was nearly as large as the one he shared with Mat and Perrin. Egwene had it alone. So, that's great. I think that's funny. Rand, as he gets more and more tough and hardened, and he's just got more shit to deal with, he worries less about comforts. But right now he's just kind of like, she's got a carpet and I don't. That's bullshit. And then, just to put one last interesting twist on the state of gender and gender relations and how different things are in Shinar, Robert Jordan gives us this. Many ways were different in Shinar from what he was used to, and there were some to which he would never become accustomed if he lived forever. He had taken to bathing in the small hours of the morning when the big tiled pools were empty of people, after he discovered that at any other time a woman might well climb into the water with him. It could be a scullion or the Lady Amelisa, Lord Agelmar's sister herself. The baths were one place in Shinar where there was no rank, expecting him to scrub her back in return for the same favor, asking him why his face was so red. Had he taken too much sun? They had soon learned to recognize his blushes for what they were, and not a woman in the keep but seemed fascinated by them. I know that people's customs and their sense of privacy and stuff should be sacrosanct, but it's still kind of fucking funny. Because Jordan writes it that way, because he thinks it's funny to have Rand be uncomfortable. Probably because he thinks the fact that the boys are so prudish is silly, and so I can't help but be amused at Rand squirming in that situation, though, yeah, I know, I wouldn't want to have to bathe with a bunch of other people either. I honestly wonder if maybe he does that partly because RJ was in the military, and being in the military is a crash course in having zero privacy, and you get over it or you squirm and suffer. And so maybe he does what he does as far as people's being forced to be uncomfortably nude in the stories because of how little privacy you're allowed in the military. Shinarans have a culture of honor and duty that is very similar to the Aiel in some ways, though much more formal. When Rand goes to try to get out of the keep, and he goes to the Lord's stable for his horse, and the groom can't saddle it because of a mystery order that says no one is to come in or out of the keep, an order whose original source is a mystery because, according to Ingtar, the keep wasn't closed until after the attack and after the horn was stolen. The groom tells Rand that he can't saddle his horse. It says, he kept dropping his eyes, not afraid, but ashamed that he could not do what Rand asked. Shinarans took shame the way other people took being branded a thief. No horse may leave this stable until the order is changed, nor any stable in the keep, my lord. When Rand is trying to flee, and he gets to his room, and it's filled with all of the serving women, and the Shadayan, and they're taking his and Matt's and parents' clothes. They're putting new clothes into the wardrobe, because Amelisa had new clothes made, which it took her a while to get them to him. He's saying, hey, those are my clothes, and one of the women pokes a finger through the hole in his only coat. There's a hole in the sleeve, and I'm kind of thinking, they keep mistaking Rand for a lord, even though he's going to dinner every night in this ratty coat. But Borderlanders don't seem to be quite so snooty about that stuff, and I think it makes sense that it took so long for them to get all of those clothes, because it was a really large order of clothes, and Faldara isn't a huge town. And so for the tailors to have made all of that stuff in the amount of time that it took, it was like 3 or 4 weeks, I think that that makes sense. But anyway, so Rand accepts the clothes, and he says, honor to the Lady Amelisa for her gift, he managed after the Shinaran way, and honor to you, Ilansu Shadayan. Please convey my words to the Lady Amelisa, and tell her I set heart and soul to serve. That ought to satisfy the Shinaran love of ceremony for both women. So that's a lot, to just say thanks for the clothes. Their welcome and departure ceremonies when the Amerlin comes in are incredibly unique too. The formality of the phrase, we offer bread and salt and welcome, when she comes in, and they're tapping the staffs, and they say, who comes here? And when the Amerlin leaves, Agelmar offers her a cup. It's just very, very formal. There's so much depth to it, because honor is everything to these people. Even the pomp of Loghain coming through Caemlyn doesn't compare to the simplicity of these formal ceremonies. They have more gravitas and dignity to them, even with their simplicity, than all of the ceremony with Loghain. But perhaps the most obvious way that the Shinerans differ in their formality is in how they treat Aes Sedai. Up until the point of the Amyrlin's arrival in Faldara, a first-time reader has seen a number of different attitudes toward Aes Sedai. There's suspicion and hostility. You get that in the Two Rivers. We get it in a number of different places along the way with the White Cloaks. You get it with Mordeth. He's ready to have the boys go outside the walls of Shadar Logoth with him and steal one of their bodies, and then he finds out that they've got an Aes Sedai with them, and he's like, oh shit, that's not cool. We've seen practical attitudes toward Aes Sedai. We've seen uneasy respect in the case of Basil Gill, a sense of comfort or familiarity with, say, Queen Morghese, or like friendship and deep respect, like a little bit more casual, like with Agelmar. But the combination of the Shineran's sense of honor and the respect for Aes Sedai means that the arrival of the Amyrlin seat kicks formality into high gear. And the keep goes into this crazy mode where it's suddenly like everything is just turned up to 11 as far as people being super excited, because it's like it rubs off on everyone. It's like this person's arrival. In Aiel terms, the lady showing up just gives everyone a ton of jih, just because she showed up, whereas among Aiel your actions earn you jih, but with the Shinerans someone can bestow it upon you just by showing up. We see as Moraine is being conveyed to the Amyrlin seat as she's summoned by Anaya and Leandrin, and they're escorting her. They're walking through the women's apartments, and it says, liveried women curtsied deeply as they passed, many more deeply than they would have for the Lord of Faldara himself. Aes Sedai, 3 together, and the Amyrlin seat herself in the keep. It was more honor than any woman of the keep had ever expected in her lifetime. A few women of noble houses were out in the halls, and they curtsied too, which they most certainly would not have done for Lord Agelmar. We also see how Lon tells Rand to behave when he goes to the Amyrlin, with a ton of formal sayings and behaviors and gestures. His body language and everything is all done very formally as a way to show respect and deference and honor to the Amyrlin, and also just to impart a sense of dignity to himself. And so we see in just a few chapters an entirely different world with very different priorities. Borderlanders don't have privilege in a way Southerners do. They don't have the privilege of maneuvering and scheming for favor. They can't be distracted. They're educated. They know that Tar Valon exists to fight the Shadow. I actually wonder if Borderland women are more likely to go to Tar Valon to try to learn to be Aes Sedai. It's like Borderlanders are really hard people, but they appreciate beauty and they respect life. And all along the Shinerans, because they are so structured and rank-oriented, have likely struggled with where to put the Emmons Fielders, who don't really fit in anywhere. They come being so very American in their way, from a place where even class doesn't mean anything, because even if you have a place, you aren't going to stay in it. You are going to talk to the highest of the high the same way you talk to a villager and not think twice about it, because you don't think about it and you don't really care. Two Rivers people are classless in more ways than one. Rand's name has them mistake him for a lord because he has what they think of as the royal Al in his name, and Nynaeve and Egwene get labeled nobility too, and I'm wondering if that's also because they are Almira and Alvir. But if you notice, even if Rand is considered nobility, he's still forced to share a room with Mat and Perrin, who might as well be commoners, so it's all just very, very interesting. The sense of class and rank and honor and distinction is so different from anything else we've seen, and the contrast between the first book and the second, or even between before and after they went through the Waygate, is just tremendous. Then we also have, to help with our world building, the arrival of the Aes Sedai. So Rand gets to see a bunch more women who are different. And it's not just a bunch of women who are culturally different or from different countries or different parts of the same country. Here are women who are used to power, women who command, women who are not fazed by anything, at least to the uninitiative, with the only men who are courageous enough to coexist with them are said to look, it says, They all had the look as if they saw things other men did not see, heard things other men did not hear. Standing at their ease, they looked as deadly as a pack of wolves. So Rand sees the Aes Sedai and the warders because he decides that he just has to walk across the courtyard while the Shiner and Welcome is taking place just to get a look at the Amyrlin, and plus it's a shortcut to the Lord's stables. And it's like, yeah, you see Moraine as a different type of woman from Village Women, but having a group of Aes Sedai is something else again, because then it's not just an individual person, but a mystique, an aura, a representative of the Aes Sedai, which is more than just a single person, Moraine. And as far as the world building with the sisters, it's not just the visuals with the pomp and the ceremony. We get character introductions, and RJ casually uses them to drop bits of information so we can learn things about new countries. Leandrin, who comes with Anaya for Moraine, is described, and it says, her dark brows and darker eyes were a sharp contrast to the multitude of pale honey braids brushing her shoulders, but the combination was not uncommon in Terrebonne. So we learn that, and then we also learn a bit about Terrebonne's speech patterns, because Terrebonners speak in a very distinct way that is kind of making fun of a bad American attempt at a French accent, so we get world building with that. And Anaya is giving Moraine news about the new false dragons, and so we casually learn a bit about Mirandi, where Anaya tells her that the false dragon in Mirandi is already in chains, and she says, to think the Mirandians of all people would deal with theirs so quickly. Ask, and they do not even call themselves Mirandians, but Lugarders or Inishallini, or this or that lord's or lady's man. Yet for fear one of their neighbors would take the excuse to invade, the Mirandians leaped on their false dragon almost as soon as he opened his mouth to proclaim himself. And then we meet a couple more Aes Sedai by name. We see Varen and Seraphel and Carlinia, and we learn a bit more about the Ajas, like Moraine talks about the Brown Aja's purpose. And along with the Dark Friends Social, which honestly has enough good stuff in it that I could devote a whole episode to it, and maybe I will the next time I go through the Great Hunt, and the rich detail RJ manages to give us about both Shinar and Aes Sedai in these first 9 chapters, we also have 2 perspective changes to minor characters and faraway places. And he uses these minor POVs from Jeffrey Bornhold and from Bael Doman to advance the plot of colossal fuckery that will go down on Tome and Head, and at the same time shows you some more great stuff about the world. We get a taste of White Cloak culture from Bornhold, and we see kind of how there are divisions in that culture. We see how little the rest of them like the Questioners, and we are introduced to Padron Nile in a flashback, which is helpful. It's good to know who he is, because the beginning of The Dragon Reborn, that prologue is from his point of view, and we get our first whispers of the Shanshan. We're hearing about war on Tome and Head and rumors of Arthur Hawkwing's armies, and so that's kind of cool, because we've heard all kinds of shit about White Cloaks, but seeing from a White Cloak's perspective, even if he's not like a great guy, Bornhold is not black and white, and so it gives some depth so that it's not just White Cloaks equals utter shitbags. And so that's nice. That's good world building. And with Bael Doman, we get to see a new city. We go to Ilion, and we learn some stuff about Ilioner culture. We see that they do a kind of Mardi Gras. There's Carnival going on. And we get to go to Easing the Badger for the first time, and that's always fun. We learn that Ilioner ship captains engage in profit sharing with their crews, and because he's had all of these different people trying to get to the artifacts that he got while he was up in Saldaea, at this time there are Kyrianen waiting for him in Easing the Badger. We get to see Kyrianen dress and learn about their accents, and because he agrees to do what they ask of them, and he takes their money and the letter that they give him, and then he opens the letter once he gets on his ship, we get our first mention of King Galdrian, because the letter is a letter designed to get Bael Doman killed, and it basically says this person is a dark friend wanted for theft from us, the royal we. And so we know about Galdry and Rioton, and that has us aware of the name ahead of time, which is important for when Rand gets into Cairhien. And so in these first 9 chapters, RJ does a really amazing job. And I apologize that I'm not able to give a more accurate description of how many pages there are in the first 9 chapters, because I am using a Kindle app, and so I can't say for sure, but it can't be more than a fifth of the book, and it's a marvelous job. It opens the world so much, and you get views of so many different types of culture in such a small bit of text. And he uses this bit of Faldara as a springboard and manages to show you a number of different countries. He gives you a good glimpse and foundation of Aes Sedai, like out of their natural environment, but still, and teaches you a little bit about the Ajas. He introduces you to and begins developing a couple of important secondary main characters like Swan Sanche and Varen. He really sets up the plot points well. Like, he just does a fabulous job. And I feel like the world building that he does at the beginning of The Great Hunt is tremendous, because there is something to being in what basically amounts to a hub, this place where there's just people and news, and you can be exposed to all kinds of stuff, and our characters get to see and learn, and plus there's just this sense of urgency the whole time, because Rand is anxious, and everything goes to shit almost right away. And so I think that the first 9 chapters of The Great Hunt are some of the best executed chapters, and one of the best executed beginnings of what is frankly one of my favorite Wheel of Time books. For all that I think that the Horn of Valir is kind of dumb, and for all that I think that the formulaic chasing someone and going after an artifact kind of thing that the first 3 books do is kind of meh, I think that The Great Hunt is actually a terrific book for any number of reasons, and so I am stoked to be getting into it. I think it starts with a bang, and the world building that he is able to do is fucking off the hook, and my possibilities for the episodes coming up are endless, and I can't wait. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Podcast of the Dragon. I'm sorry it's taken so long to get it out. I've had some stuff going on in my personal life that's been cutting into my podcasting time, and it kind of sucks, but so it goes. You can find me on Twitter at Warder Gray, that's Gray with an E. Podcast of the Dragon finally has its own Discord, so I'll tweet the link to the Discord again, and you can find that there. You should check it out, join my Discord. You can talk to me about the podcast there. You should also check out Watt Trivia and Games. You can find the link to the Discord at Trivia Watt. I finally got to compete in one of the trivia games I'm normally not allowed to because I'm the High Inquisitor there, and it is super fun. It's really well coordinated, and I really recommend it. You should check that out. If you want to email me, you can do so at podcastofthedragon@gmail.com. If you don't want to check out Discord and you just want to talk to me that way, you can send me questions, it can be constructive criticism. I'm so down to hear ideas for future episode topics if you have those. My music is by Kevin MacLeod. I'm the Grey Warder, and if all I had to do for a brand new wardrobe was get naked in a room full of people, I'd dance while I did it. Though seriously, why only 1 new pair of boots? I'm getting a dozen coats. Could I at least get 2 pairs of new boots? Is that greedy?